So there was a Reddit thread the other day asking Redditors who have had to kill in self-defense, how did this change you psychologically? Do you feel guilt or remorse, or do you think you did what you had to do? Now, one of the replies was a guy who served in Iraq and Afghanistan for the US Marine Corps, and basically he said he had to kill a 14-year-old boy in self-defense because his 14-year-old boy had popped out of a house with, I think, an AK-47, and he had to kill him. And he said he feels really bad and it still fucks him up to this day. He remembers the hate and pain in this boy's eye. And a lot of people in the comments were saying, thank you for your service, to which I replied to one of them saying, thank you for killing the 14-year-old peasant boy who probably hates others occupying his country for capitalism. Not that I'm being critical at the commenter for doing what he had to do to survive, but thanking him for it seems a bit weird. And in response to that, I got so many hate comments telling me I was disgraced, I should kill myself and everything like this. And I just wanted to talk about why you don't necessarily have to be thankful for soldiers and their service and everything. Because I think in America especially, people have been brainwashed, like the troops have been elevated, they're all heroes and everything. Everything they do for America is just amazing. And you're defending our country by killing some 14-year-old peasant kid in the Middle East. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really add up. So I just wanted to give my thoughts on what I think of, you know, the army in general and soldiers, and why I think this forced patriotism bullshit is just really annoying. It's not as much in this country, in the UK, as it is in America, but it's still present. So basically, in my mind, the only war you can really be uncynical about in a lot of the Western countries is World War II. You know, Britain went to war to support France and the Allies in Europe to fight against Nazi Germany. It held out on its own for, you know, a year before America came and joined in. And, you know, in general, they're fighting fascism, they're fighting Japanese imperialism. You can't really argue with that, and you are really grateful, especially to those who fought the Nazis in Europe, that they won and everything. You watch Dunkirk and you're like, holy shit. Imagine if they never came back to France and liberated it. Imagine if Germany also conquered England. What would our world look like today? And you watch things like Man in the High Castle, you're like, I am so grateful to the millions of people who died fighting the Nazis, and to some extent the Japanese as well. So I'm obviously grateful for the veterans who served in that, and the people who have died since, you know, in old age and everything. And obviously if I ever met one, I would thank them for their service, because, you know, they did something really heroic. And I'd also, you know, not that many have been alive in my lifetime, most of them have been dead before I was born, but World War I as well. And even though that is generally an imperialist war, a war that really, you know, wasted so many lives for no good reason, it was a different era, and these people kind of sold a lie. You know, 800,000 British people died in World War I. And, you know, to some extent you could say they were defending the liberty of France and Belgium and some other countries in Europe. But they were also expanding their empire in the Middle East, fighting the Ottomans. And a lot of the issues today, whether it be in Syria or Israel, all really stem from World War I. Like I said, it's a different time, it's 100 years ago, and it was kind of hard for one reason not to serve. To start with, a lot of people signed up initially, and loads of people were conscripted. You know, you had to join the military. So I'm grateful they did it. You know, I'm grateful. I feel really bad for a lot of the people who died, and the people who had to go through it afterwards with their families, who had been made to fight this huge imperialist war. But at the same time, they were conscripted. You know, I can't really have an argument against it. They were forced to do it. And maybe there's a couple other wars I'd be a bit less cynical about. Like, even though Korea in general is a bit of a shitty one, but you look at North Korea today and you go, okay, I guess I'm grateful the UN troops, you know, the Americans and the British, and, you know, from every single country, even to like Turkey and stuff. I'm glad they fought the North Koreans, because, you know, the Korean peninsula dominated by the Korean Workers' Party would obviously be a way worse place. So I'm grateful for their service as well. And maybe even some kind of imperialist wars like the Falklands, because we've seen lately, especially I think it's 2015 the referendum was, most people in the Falklands, and nearly all of them, want to stay part of the UK. And Argentina haven't really ever had a claim to the people who live there. You know, people who live there aren't really from Argentine descent. Argentina never had a colony there or anything. It's just, they see it as a part of their, like, historical, I guess, legacy or something, so it's part of their country. But I agree with that war as well. But basically my problem lies with a lot of America's, especially imperialist wars. So Vietnam, right, am I thanking someone for their service for generally, you know, killing civilians or suppressing, you know, people who wanted their independence, for killing 2 million Vietnamese, you know, people who were fighting with the most basic weaponry, who just wanted independence for their country? Am I really thanking someone for their service in that war? If any of you have read books by people who went to Vietnam, I recommend Tim O'Brien's If I Die in a Combat Zone. You'll see the sheer scale and carelessness they had when dealing with the Vietnamese, even the civilians. So they get shot by a sniper and call in an airstrike on a village, killing everyone inside basically. You can't really justify that. And why were they doing that? People say it's to, you know, protect America, protect their country, but they were killing these civilians who just wanted independence, who the Americans had promised in 1945 that they could have their own independence. a guy, Ho Chi Minh, who quoted the Declaration of Independence when he declared independence of Vietnam in 1945. These people just wanted to live away from authoritarian rule, which was in the South, thanks to the Americans putting ZM in charge. And you're saying to me, a lot of people do right-wingers say that you were fighting for democracy, you were fighting for freedom, you were fighting to protect America. And it was all based on a lie, the Gulf of Tonkin, and it was all based on this assumption that if Vietnam became communist, it would become a stooge of China, which of course it didn't, because it went to war with China in 1979. And that is just one example. So then we get to Iraq and Afghanistan. So Afghanistan, okay, fair enough in some respects. So the Taliban regime were harbouring Al-Qaeda, and they gave bin Laden a place to plan the 9/11 attacks. So I guess I can understand why you overthrew the Taliban, but a lot of people criticise it lately, saying they should have just gone in and got bin Laden and left. And especially the way that war has been handled as well. The Taliban are stronger than they were in 2001 today. They have more territory. They're not going away anytime soon. We've just made the problems worse. And the attempts to rebuild this country have really not gone well at all. And the reason they're so popular is because, you have loads of foreign countries just occupying another country. It's an ancient country with an ancient tribal system, and these people aren't going to go away anytime soon. Yeah, it's shitty. They live in a fundamentalist, tribal Islamic country. But, just because you're American, you can't just go around and try and shape all these countries in your image. It's part of the neocon ideology of the late 90s and early 2000s, which is like, we will install democracy everywhere, American style libertarian democracy. We're going to put that all across the world. And what are you dying for if you go to Afghanistan these days? You're dying for capitalism, essentially. And especially in Iraq, this is the worst case. All the people who died in Iraq, they basically died for capitalism. There's a good quote my lecturer said, is that the Iraq war wasn't just about oil, but it wouldn't have happened if Iraq didn't have loads of oil, which I totally agree with. And people always say like, oh, Saddam Hussein was such a bad guy. No one cared about that in the 1980s when he was using mustard gas on his own civilians and the Iranians. No one cared about Gaddafi either. No one cared about the Shah in Iran. America has backed dictators throughout its whole history. So to think that suddenly they're outraged by Saddam Hussein, by creating this hysteria that he's in alliance with Al-Qaeda, a fundamentalist Islamic group who would view Saddam as an apostate because he's an Arab socialist. It made absolutely no sense. And the fact that they could convince 69% of Americans that Saddam Hussein had a hand in 9/11 is insane, and a massive failing on the media's part. So yeah, the Americans and the British, they went over to this country, they toppled the dictator, and then, created this situation where a massive civil war started that only ended essentially last year, and you could argue it's still going on a bit today. And it just completely fucked over the country. How many dead? I think it's over 500,000 Iraqis have been killed. Is it 6,000 Americans have been killed? And for what? For capitalism, basically. If people didn't know, the French and the Germans had oil deals with Saddam Hussein that were going to go into effect when the sanctions lifted, and the Americans and British didn't. So let's ask yourself, why did them two countries invade while the other two didn't support it? It's because of the oil, and it's because of capitalism. And people, you went over there, fucked over a country, killed loads of their civilians. Lots of them hate, ISIS came about because of what happened after the war, basically. The West supported a Shia-dominated government, and they really excluded the Sunni Arabs who had been Saddam Hussein's government and, had to support Saddam Hussein. And they made this situation where ISIS could come to power, and loads of Sunni insurgent groups could get prominence in Iraq. So am I meant to thank someone for that, And the real consequences of the Iraq war is that terrorism in the UK, across Europe and the US, has massively increased. So am I meant to thank you for going over there and being a part of this, which has really affected countries like mine detrimentally and killed civilians who have had nothing to do with these wars? And here's really the crux of everything I'm saying. So fair enough if you join the army, right? Fair enough if you're forced to go do these things. You're forced to go invade other countries. You're forced to go kill these people that you're occupying their country and everything like that. But the problem is, I'm not going to thank you for your service. I'm not going to thank you for propping up US foreign policy. If half the US military suddenly were like, okay, fuck it, I'm not going to prop this up anymore, and left, then they couldn't do what they do. So every country the US is a rogue state, North Korea, Iran, they are surrounded by US bases. They can't do anything. The US has bases all across the world, has aircraft carriers moving across the world. Even China, right? They have Taiwan, they have Japan, they have all these other little islands. They've surrounded China, but they always fearmonger about China. They've surrounded places like Russia and Europe, but they always fearmonger about Russia. And in that, they have bases all across Africa and the Middle East. So I'm meant to be like, thank you for your service, thank you for propping up the US war machine, thank you for illegally invading other countries with them, where it actually affects the civilian populations of the countries you're from. And that's why this thank the troops thing is such bullshit. So I respect soldiers who are brave. I respect people who show bravery in combat. I respect the you know, the grit and determination it takes to be a soldier, I'm not going to thank you for it. At the end of the day, it's your job, and I don't agree with the morals of it. I don't agree with what you're a part of. You know, for example, if America had a massive army but it was only used for self-defense, that is totally fine with me. You know, Japanese has a self-defense force. That's totally fine with me. You know, you're signing up to defend your country, but Americans justify this by invading countries in the middle of Central Asia, which have some of the poorest people on earth, and say they're defending their own country, or invading Iraq and be like, we're defending our own country. How are you defending your own country by invading some irrelevant countries in the Middle East and Central Asia? You're not. That's just the propaganda you're fed, and you happily eat it up. Because if you were actually defending your country, do you think anyone would have a problem with that? No. And you've actually, in the US's history, you've slaughtered people defending their country. Iraqis, you've killed Vietnamese by the millions who were defending their country, and you justify it by, I gotta go over to Vietnam, kill 2 million Vietnamese peasant fighters because they somehow pose a danger to my country, who is the most powerful country in the history of all mankind, has the most nuclear weapons, and has the biggest army. Somehow 2 million little Vietnamese peasant fighters are a threat to that. Saddam Hussein is a threat to that, even though his army's been completely crippled by the first Gulf War, and he really has no capacity to wage war properly against any other country. So you see the rationale behind it. You know, I don't have a problem with people in the army, and if you legitimately are defending your country because you're going to be the ones defending your country, I don't have a problem with that. But the US does not need to have all these bases across the world, all this presence across the world, because it's essentially imperialism, and it is imperialism. The US is an empire, which people just need to accept. It's a bit different in this country, right? Because our army is small. It still does a lot of shit abroad, but I can understand the argument for being in the UK a bit more because we're a small little island and we do have to maybe defend ourselves against a country like Russia. Okay, fair enough. But we still do shitty things like the Americans do. But the Americans are even worse because they've brainwashed themselves, and, you know, the military industrial complex, the government brainwashes everyone with patriotism bullshit, you know, standing for the national anthem for a sports game. What kind of shit is that? You know, saying the Pledge of Allegiance before school every day, that is just some bullshit, you know. I can't even imagine saying the national anthem before school every day when I went. It's crazy. It's crazy how patriotism in America is forced down your throat and you can't disagree with it. You know, a lot of Americans probably don't agree with what I'm saying, but just think about what your country does to you. How are you defending your country by fighting imperialist wars? You know, when the British are doing all this shit in India and America and Canada and everything in their imperialist days, imagine justifying that by saying, yeah, but it's for the safety of England. It's crazy, isn't it? And it's still crazy when Americans make that argument. Like I said, the poorest people on earth don't pose a threat to your country, but it's just a justification you use to control their territory. So overall, my main argument is I don't hate soldiers, I don't disrespect them. Like I said, I respect the determination it takes, I respect the bravery it can take in war, but I'm also pretty frustrated that, you know, Americans buy all this bullshit and prop up their imperialist regime. They prop up US imperialism that has lasted since 1945. And I don't have to thank you for that. I really wish a lot of you didn't do that. And I'm not going to thank you for killing really, really poor kids and poor men and women and children, everything, in countries that have really done nothing to the UK or the US. I'm not going to thank you for that. If you fought in World War II, if you fought in Korea, if you fought in World War I, which you're not alive anymore, if you maybe fought in the Falklands even, if you fought in, I don't know, Bosnia or something, maybe I will say, oh, thank you for doing that, or I don't know, you did a good thing. Maybe not thank you, but you know, well done to you for, you know, standing up for something and doing a good thing. But if you invaded Iraq, Afghanistan, occupied Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, you're occupying African countries at the moment, I'm not going to thank you for that. If you fought in Vietnam, I'm not going to thank you for that. I feel bad for you if you've been conscripted, but I'm not going to thank you for killing fucking Vietnamese peasant farmers in the name of democracy, in the name of American security, which is just total bullshit. So anyway, what do you guys think? I know probably a lot of people are going to be pretty butthurt about this. I've said some shit about this before, I think, in other videos, and it didn't go down well, but it's just my opinion, and it's coming from, I guess, to me, this is the real world, right? And America is an empire. I know people don't like hearing that, and you pretend you're not, but, you know, wasn't it 13 colonies you started off with? America isn't 13 colonies, is it? You know, you already conquered most of your continent first, and you weren't the natives there. You know, you kicked out the British, you kicked out the Mexicans, you killed all the natives mostly. You annexed Puerto Rico, you occupied Cuba, you occupied the Philippines. See, it's just like, this is the origins of the American Empire, and because they dressed up their constitution and declaration and all this fancy language, and people pretend they're anti-imperialist, they never were and they never will. And, you know, if you're propping up an imperialist power through fruitless wars against peasant people and propping up authoritarian regimes, I'm not really going to thank you for that. unless it's really specific circumstances where I do feel you had a point, I guess. So if you're on Twitter, follow me at the Kavanagh, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.